Okay, good evening, everybody. This is the second part of our study of Nagarjuna's Wisdom of the Middle Way. Our teacher for tonight is Professor Georges Dreyfus. Presently, Professor Dreyfus teaches at Williams College in Massachusetts. His interests range widely and include the study of consciousness, which he has developed with the Mind and Life Institute. His studies are inspired by the spirit of non-sectarianism, and he has studied and practiced Theravada meditation, as well as learning from the various Tibetan schools. Let me close by saying that he was awarded in 1985 the degree of Larampa Geshe, the first Western student to be so honored. Professor, thank you very much for teaching us. And let me further say that if students have questions, the professor says he would like you to ask them during the course of the session. And you can do that by, at the bottom of your screen, going into reactions and raising your hand electronically, or you can do that by asking in the chat. So, Professor, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So hello, everybody. So we're going to talk about the Mūlamadhyamakakārikā of Nagarjuna. I'm going to teach a text, and I'm going to try to, to remain as close as possible to the text, meaning I'm not this is the text I'm going to use, right? What is knowing reality?
That's the name of that we gave to tonight's course, but the text.
Oh, I see. So
yes.
the text that I'm using is this one, which is the translation from Sidritz and Katsura, which is a translation from the Sanskrit. Professor Katsura is really a Sanskrit scholar, and Mark Sidritz is a good Buddhist philosopher. So together they form an interesting team, and it is their translation which I think is the closest to the original. And so what I intend to do these days is just to talk about and read some of the text and explain some of the text, and not by and in doing so trying to remain as close to the text as possible. As you know, this is a very tricky text. It's supposed to be a difficult text. Actually, in a way, it's not so difficult, but it's just the Madhyamaka way of thinking is difficult. And so the text turns out to be difficult. I think other Buddhist texts, like Dharmakirti, are from a linguistic point of view much more difficult, but this text is difficult because of what it is trying to teach us. So Nagarjuna, I thought I had gotten rid of my email. Oh, maybe it's somebody else. Okay, never mind. So this text, as you probably know, is supposed to be an explanation of the Prajnaparamita Sutra, and at least in as much as the sutra teaches emptiness. What is strange, if you want to put it like this, is that Nagarjuna never refers to the Prajnaparamita Sutra in the Mūlamadhyamakakārikā. The only sutra he refers to is some sutra, Katayana, question to Katayana, or something like this, which is a sutra of the first turning of the wheel, what Tibetans would call Hinayana. So it's an interesting question. Why didn't Nagarjuna refer to the Prajnaparamita? The Prajnaparamita is clearly prior to Nagarjuna, at least the 8,000 lines, the 8,000 stanza Prajnaparamita Sutra is definitely earlier than Nagarjuna. So it's not the case that that sutra did not exist when Nagarjuna composed this text, but he does not refer to this text. And so Western scholars have speculated, why didn't he do that? Is it because he was addressing this text to a particular audience that was not sympathetic to the Prajnaparamita Sutra? That's one hypothesis. That's a fairly good one. Another hypothesis is that, and I'm more skeptical of that hypothesis, but that Nagarjuna was not relying on the Prajnaparamita Sutra. That's another hypothesis, which I don't know what to make. So in all cases, in every case, this is taken by the Tibetan tradition to be an explanation of the teaching of emptiness, that all dharmas, all phenomena are empty, right? As expounded by the Prajnaparamita Sutra. Okay, so Nagarjuna represents a turning point in Indian Buddhism. He was a Brahmin, meaning he was highly educated in Sanskrit. And he represents a turning point because he addresses himself not just to other Buddhists, as prior Buddhist texts have done, but it addresses himself to different Indian schools of thought. And he's probably the first to do that. And henceforth, what we'll see in Indian Buddhism is that many authors are going to address themselves not just to other Buddhists, but also to Samkhya and Nyaya, and later on maybe even to Vedantins. And that's something which is quite unique, which opens a new chapter. We find this in many later authors like Dharmakirti as well. So Nagarjuna is definitely extremely important. And he represents this turn of Buddhism away from intra-Buddhist dialogue to inter-sectarian dialogue or debates, maybe better. And that's an important turn. And one of the richness of the Tibetan tradition is that it has inherited this tradition of doing philosophy or developing one's idea in relation not just to other Buddhists, as was done prior to Nagarjuna, but in relation to other schools of Indian Buddhism. Okay, so the text is this one, Mūlamadhyamakakārikā. This is by very, very far the best translation. There is nothing that comes close to that. And so this is what I'm going to base myself on. I studied the Mūlamadhyamakakārikā in Tibetan with my teacher, Genyima, who was probably the best specialist of Madhyamaka in the Gelug tradition, and perhaps even among Tibetans, living Tibetan scholars at that time. He taught Madhyamaka to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and so I studied with him. And so he made me memorize not the whole thing, but about 17 chapters. And then after I had memorized 17 chapters, he told me, okay, I am going to teach you. So his way of teaching was a little bit peculiar because he didn't teach really a lot of things. What he did mostly was to have debate with me about the text. But his debates were very special. And my thinking about this text is largely inspired, not only, but largely inspired by his teaching, and also inspired by reading other Tibetan traditions, not just Gelugpa, but other Tibetan tradition. And so getting a better view of what are some of the possible interpretations of this text. Now, there are many interpretations of this text by non-Tibetan scholar. There is very old Chabatsky, and there are other interpretations. This is not what I am keeping in mind. What I'm keeping in mind is the different Tibetan traditions, because they are good guides to this text, because this text is not so difficult to read, but it's really tricky because it has a particular way to deal with reality. And so it is this way that makes it very tricky. The text itself is not particularly tricky, and even in Sanskrit, it's not such a difficult text, but Madhyamaka is difficult because of its approach, right? Okay, so Madhyamaka is the middle way. What does the middle way mean to you? The middle way. Madhyamaka, right? Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Okay. I think in this context, doesn't it mean a middle way between eternalism and nihilism? Between
okay.
Between
right.
reification and basically believing nothing is real.
Okay, that's right. So eternalism and nihilism, right? If you turn to the chapter 15, verse 10, the question is, what does eternalism mean, right? And what does nihilism mean, right? And so if you turn to chapter 15, which is one of the important chapters, right? It's chapter 15, verse 10, page 161. It says, it exists is an eternalist view. It does not exist is an annihilationist view. Therefore, the wise should not have recourse to either existence or non-existence. Right? It neither is nor is not, right? So, what is it? That's the difficulty of understanding the middle way. And that's why there are so many interpretations, because when Nagarjuna say it neither exists nor does not exist, the answer, it abides in the middle. But what does it mean, right? And that's the difficulty of understanding Madhyamaka. Okay, so what we should get from this is, I mean, the question is, what is Nagarjuna after, right? What is Nagarjuna trying to say? And what is Nagarjuna trying to undo, right? That's what we need to think about. And so he says us, he's after undoing existence and non-existence. If you negate existence, don't you have non-existence? No?
No.
I say, so what do you have?
Relational existence.
Relational existence, okay. But relational existence is existence, right?
Yes, but I thought your question was if it doesn't, if you say doesn't exist and it doesn't exist at all.
Well, I'm asking, if you negate existence, don't you get non-existence?
If so, so if you're saying you negate inherent existence, or you
No, I'm not talking about that. Don't try to escape. You see, it's important not to lay out an interpretation on the text immediately and say, this is what the text is saying, because the text is very rich and has given rise to many interpretations. And the reason it's not because people are stupid, but because the text is rich and deep, right? And so it's important, and this is what Genima taught me, because I had like the same, oh yeah, this is Gelugpa answer, so you know, intrinsic existence, yeah, we know the answer. No, that's not the way to approach a text like this. A way to approach a text like this is to take it seriously and as literally as possible in order to kind of probe its depth, at least a little bit, right? So neither exists nor does not exist, right? That's a middle way, right? And that's a middle way of thinking. And so to understand the middle way of thinking, what we have to do is to look at the text and understand what the text is doing, what is its method, and what it is seeking to do or undo. Okay? So let's maybe start the text, okay? So chapter 1. Not from itself, not from another, not from both, nor without cause. Never in any way is there any existing thing that has arisen, right? So this is the kind of basic statement for the whole chapter and in a way for the whole text, right? So what do you notice with this approach? What is Nagarjuna doing here?
He's being very negative. He's
What is it?
He's denying things rather than asserting. He's asserting denial and negation.
Okay, and denying, that's going to be really interesting because you notice that when he's saying neither exists nor does not exist, it's not a, I mean, if you have a straight negation, right? It goes from exist, I deny exist, you get non-existent, right? So this is not what he's doing what he's doing here is not exactly capturable like this, right?
Right.
And so important to understand, how is Nagarjuna trying, what is his method? His method basically is to lay out the conceptual possibilities and to undo each possibility one by one, right? That's how Nagarjuna is going to proceed, right? Lay out all the alternatives and then draw the consequences from this alternative and show that this consequence, each of these alternatives lead to absurd consequences. Okay? That some people call this the Prasanga Method. Because it's not making any positive statement. It's not proving anything. It's just taking each concept like causality, like walking, like self, and so on, many different notions, and laying out the alternatives and then showing that each alternative is impossible. So here we have not from itself, not from another, not from both, nor without causes. So there are four alternatives, right? How can things be produced? From themselves, from others, from both, from neither. Is this exhaustive?
It doesn't seem like it can be exhaustive, because then Nagarjuna has to propose the way things can exist.
Remember, we're not saying what you've been taught by other people. We're looking at the text here. If you show me when Nagarjuna say things exist, we're on board. If you cannot show me, then I'm just reading the text.
I guess I'm in.
Otherwise, we're not going to get what the text is saying.
It seems that the text is breaking everything down to absurdity.
Well, it's breaking everything
The-
down into alternatives, right? Right?
Yeah, but by going to absurdity, you have to let go, and then something else arises. But
I don't know about that. That's way too, I want to talk about the text.
Okay, sorry.
I want to talk about the text. I don't know about what will arise and so on. I just want to talk about the text.
But don't you think it's fair to say that things do exist? Like, even when Nagarjuna is teaching this, he's teaching it to people where things do exist. And maybe he's saying, you know, you, Sankhya, or Nyaya, whatever, your view of how you think things exist is wrong. But we have, but
So
things
I
do,
have the right view?
sorry?
So Nagarjuna is saying I am right?
I think that's where he's
This is
headed.
how things are?
I think eventually that is what he will
Things
say. But
exist? Where do
Sorry?
you find this in the text?
that he says things exist.
Yeah, please let me know.
Maybe in another 10 years, I'll come back with that answer.
Yeah. This is why it's important to look at the text itself, not kind of summary of the text. Because, yeah, what you want to avoid is people falling into nihilism, right? Yes, because the middle way is between eternalism and nihilism, right? So we're not saying that things don't exist, but are we saying that things exist? And if we are saying that things exist, where is this sand?
I think to get back to something that you were saying earlier, I think that the four alternatives that Nagarjuna proposes does exhaust all the possibilities. Things can either arise from themselves, and we need to look at that. They can either rise from something else, or from both, or from neither, without a cause. And
exactly.
There's there's nothing else. There's no other possibility.
Yeah, it's exhaustive, right?
Yeah.
And this is his favorite approach, which is called in Sanskrit the Chatushkoti, that is the four extremes, right? Tashi in Tibetan, which is based on binary opposition, right? So what Nagarjuna lays out exhaustively what are the possibilities, and then is going to explore one possibility after another to show that it leads to what you were saying, absurdities, right? Notice that he never says how things are, right? He never says how things are, does he?
Does he just want you to kind of keep that tension and not really pinpoint or nail anything down,
Yeah.
to keep it kind of a tension there?
Yes, that's a difficulty of Madhyamaka. It's like keeping different balls in the air, right? Without letting them fall on the ground, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you go for it exists, one ball falls to the ground. If it goes for it doesn't exist, another ball falls to the ground. And the goal of the exercise is to try to undo this way of thinking into binary opposition, right? And so the entire book is a bunch of reasonings, which are called prasanga, meaning statement of consequences, which draw consequences from various positions. And some of these arguments are really good, maybe some are less good. It's a bunch, it's like throwing a bunch of stuff at you and see what works. And the goal of the exercise is to undo this thinking, which is thinking of how things are. This is how things are. This is how reality is. This is Nagarjuna's great target. And this is why it's slippery, because every statement can be questioned, is it really how things are? Whether the statement is positive or negative, right? Is this really how things are? So, for example, you said relational existence, right? Well, is it really how things are? Yes, that's a Madhyamaka way of thinking, right? Which is constantly undoing binary opposition, undoing and seeking the alternative and undoing this alternative by showing that it leads to a dead end, to contradictions. the frustrating part of Madhyamaka is that you can never say how things are, tell me. Now, sometimes Madhyamaka use slogan like things are empty, right? Is it how things are? That's why Madhyamaka is a really particular way of thinking. In Western modern philosophy, we could call it deconstructive. It's not a constructive philosophy which seeks to create a system. It's a deconstructive approach that inhabits concept from the inside and shows that any alternative that we take is going to be problematic. And so we will never get to the point of saying, this is how things are. And this is exhilarating, but also incredibly frustrating. Because it's like, we want to tell me, right? Tell me how it is. It exists relationally, don't worry. Yeah, okay. Okay, so not from itself. So this is supposed to be, in a way, the cornerstone of the first chapter and in the whole book, in a way, because it takes on the main adversaries of the Madhyamaka, which are not limited to Buddhist, but include non-Buddhist as well, right? So, not from itself, that's Samkhya. Samkhya hold that things are born from themselves, though we'll have to talk about what that means. From others is both early Buddhist, meaning Abhidharma Buddhist, and Nyayika, Nyaya. So I'm going to have to talk a little bit about these schools because to understand what it is that they are talked about. And then the third one is, I'm not going really to talk much about it, but it's Jain, which is a very sophisticated tradition of Indian philosophy about which, unfortunately, I know very little, and it's my problem because Jainism is an extremely interesting Indian tradition, and it's also a very interesting ethical tradition because if you've been to India and you live in India, you know that if you meet a Jain person, you can rely on that person because Jains are incredibly honest and forthright, and so they have a very high reputation in India. And the fourth koti, the fourth alternative is without cause, right? Now, this is attributed to materialists. Okay, so the first one, Samkhya. What's a Samkhya view of causality? Have you studied Samkhya?
I know a
Is
little
it
bit.
that?
Sorry.
I think we've heard a little bit about it, but that's about it. I've heard a little bit about it.
That Samkhya, there are two realities. One is the self, which is called Purusha, and the other is nature, which is called Prakrit. So where does all the things that exist outside of the self, they come from Prakrit, right? Meaning Prakrit, they are evolution, they evolve out of Prakrit, right? Out of nature. Which is why the effect, which is the different elements of reality, are said to be of the same nature as the cause, right? What's a cause?
Something that creates an effect.
Yeah, but in this case, what's the ultimate cause? It's
Prakriti?
Yeah, Prakriti, right? Everything comes out of Prakriti except the self, which is permanent, Purusha, right?
Got it.
And so this is why Nagarjuna say, not from itself. Right? Itself means that cause, according to the Samkhya, would be born from, effects like the human body, the brain, external reality, everything is produced from Prakrit, right?
So
And
the self here, is it referring to the Purusha?
Self is Purusha. So we put Purusha apart because Purusha is not involved in causality, right? Because
Oh, wow.
Purusha is permanent, right? So we don't care about Purusha. What we care here is about causality, right? And causality in the Samkhya philosophy is the fact that all the different elements called the tattvas are produced from Prakrit, right? They are an evolution of Prakrit, right? And so they are of the same nature as Prakrit. And this is why Nagarjuna says, not from itself. Okay?
Professor Dreyfus, can you elaborate?
Yes.
Because I have never understood why the way the Sankhya describe it, it makes sense, you know, from
Makes
their
sense
lens.
to you.
It makes sense to me from their lens, why you can get multiplicity from Prakriti.
Yes.
You know, you just have different combinations, and
Yes.
depending on the conditions, you get different things.
Yes.
What's wrong with that?
What's wrong with that? Okay. It's not true it's wrong, right? You know, this is what Nagarjuna says, right? I think it's important when we study this text. I teach a course on in Indian philosophy, and I have 12 classes, and I have 7 classes Buddhist and 5 classes Hindu, because I really like Nagarjuna. Otherwise, I would have 6 because I don't want my students to think, I know the answer. I want my students to take this idea seriously, because if they are not to be taken seriously, they are not worth to be refuted either. This is a profound text, and the notions that this text address are worth exploring. And so if Nagarjuna takes the trouble to refute the Samkhya, it's because the Samkhya have something interesting to say. Because if it's just fake news, there is no point in using philosophy to refute it, right? So this is, we have to understand what's the Samkhya's view and what in Nagarjuna objecting. Where is the objection, right? And you rightly think, yeah, this is a great way to think, right? There is nature and everything comes out of nature. It's a little bit like Vedanta, right? Everything is comes out of Brahman and so on. And so it's not exactly the same, right? But it's a little bit like that. What's wrong with that? So this is the question, right? So the second stanza addressed that. It says, not from itself, right? The intrinsic nature of existence does not exist in the conditions. So this is all what Nagarjuna says, right? So let's take the example of the example which is the example taken by many of the Madhyamaka commentary, the example of the sprout, right? The sprout comes out of the seed, right? So the Samkhya view is that the sprout and the seed are of the same nature, right? Okay? What's the problem here?
They're clearly not.
There is no problem? Okay, so we're
No.
no.
They're clearly not the same nature.
Okay, why not?
No, there's a serious problem because a sprout is not a seed.
The sprout is not the seed. Okay. One of the commentaries says, if the sprout were the same nature of the seed, production would be pointless, right? So that's one reasoning, right? Why is the seed not of the same nature? So sorry, the sprout not of the same nature as the seed?
I'll give it a go.
Yeah.
I'll give it a go.
Who is?
Okay, so if the sprout has a Nadine.
What's
or
that?
The yellow hat. It's
Yes,
me.
yes,
If
yeah,
the
I see
sprout
you.
had the same nature
The
as
sound is not very clear.
if the sprout had I'll speak. I've been typing into the chat room, but if the sprout is the same nature as the seed, then it couldn't be anything else but a sprout ever.
If the sprout were of the same nature as the seed, okay, keep going.
Then they would, if it had intrinsic nature like this, then it would always be a sprout. It would never be anything else but a sprout, but it can rot. It can turn into dirt.
Sorry.
Or a seed, but the seed can also rot. Okay, the seed can also rot and turn into dirt and turn into my lime tree or turn into worm poop, or it doesn't have the same nature or would always turn into the same thing every single time. It wouldn't turn into anything because it would have a permanent nature and it doesn't have a permanent nature. I could talk about the seed or the sprout.
Well, let's
it would
talk
be the
about,
same for both.
Okay. The idea is if its production comes from the same nature, it would be pointless, right? Or it would be an infinite regress, meaning if the sprout is already in the seed, then what's the point of?
You don't need a seed, right? You
don't need the sprout because you have already the sprout when you have the seed, right?
Right. Right, you're gonna drive me nuts.
Yes, that's the effect of Madhyamaka, don't worry.
Isn't that a misreading of Sankhya?
Well, that's a good question. Okay, what would the Samkhya say?
I think the Sankhya would say, that out of matter, out of Prakriti.
Yeah, no. Let's talk about the seed and the sprout. Let's not.
So Sankhya would say, you have a seed, and when it meets certain conditions, you will get a sprout. And there is some
everybody
relationship.
agrees with that. Everybody agrees with that.
Right. So they're not saying that, if you have a seed, that there is a ready-made sprout contained in it.
They're not saying that, but they are saying that they're of the same nature, right?
Right, but that is like, I am of the same nature as my parents.
Are you? I hope. Really?
I think so. I think we share the same DNA.
Yes, you do share the same DNA, but presumably
so to me, that is same nature.
What's that?
So to me, that could also be saying same nature.
DNA and nature is not exactly the same thing, right?
So we go back to defining what do we mean by nature?
Yes. And that's tricky, right? What do we mean by nature, right? So from itself or from another, right? So itself is, the sprout is of the same nature as the seed, right? Meaning it comes out of the seed, right? It's a transformation of the seed. You could say something like that, right? What would be wrong with that? The question is whether every effect has to pre-exist into its cause, right? And so, right? So,
I suppose people who ask that question is asking if something doesn't pre-exist in the cause, then what is the basis for the effect to arise?
Yeah, that's the idea that the Samkhya has, right?
Yeah, that's why they asked, and that's why they ended up positing that there's already the effect in the seed. So that would be the basis for the effect to arise.
But then what would you answer if Nagarjuna told you, then it follows that the production of the sprout is pointless because the sprout already exists in the seed?
Yeah, I've already been taught by my Gelug teacher, so that's the argument that I've learned, that if the result already exists, why produce again?
Yes, that's what Nagarjuna is saying. Question, is it fair to the Samkhya or not? Why not? You're going to end up the evening being a Samkhya, watch out. Which is not so bad, actually.
I think you may have to come back, Professor Dreyfus, and just teach a Sankhya responding to Nagarjuna
It's actually
workshop.
pretty close to Tantra in a way, so it's quite interesting.
Well, I've never taken interest in Samkhya, but in the short 50 minutes of you talking, I'm now interested. Thank you so much, Professor Dreyfus.
Yeah, this is Indian philosophy, it's really interesting. And, the non-Buddhists were pretty smart too. And it's important to understand both sides because it enriches one's own thinking. Whereas if you take the others as like morons who are just going to be pushed, kind of pushovers, which just Nagarjuna has to say, woo, and everybody say, oh, yes, we're becoming Buddhist and so on. That's not a very interesting way of thinking, and we don't learn a whole lot if we take the text like that.
So may I ask Dr.
Yes,
Dreyfus, is the Buddhist description of the Samkhya accurate?
The description I gave you is accurate, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the Buddhist description of Samkhya that you find in the tenets text is relatively accurate. What often is lacking is the kind of sometimes teachers have a difficulty inhabiting different systems, right? And so they say, oh yeah, this is obviously wrong because of this or that. But Samkhya's were pretty smart, and they were an important school of Indian philosophy. And so it's interesting to try to think about each school and what each school thinking is, and then it becomes a real inquiry rather than learning what the quote unquote right answer is, which in the Madhyamaka context is a bigger problem even than usual, right? This is how Genyima would teach me, just debate. And you have to answer, you have to do the debate, and then when the debate is over, when you could not pursue the debate, the class was finished, and then we'll meet another day. So this is the fun part. So this is the reasoning towards the Samkhya, right? If effects come out of causes, are of the same nature of causes, then the question is, wouldn't it be pointless for production since the effect, the sprout, already pre-exists in its cause, right? Now, you may think, well, this is not quite what the Samkhya have in mind, right? So one possible answer from the Samkhya is the sprout pre-exists in the seed, but it exists at the potential, as a potential, not as an actuality, right? That would be a reasonable answer.
Actually,
Yes?
I was thinking that.
Do you understand my answer?
Yes.
You do, okay.
But more than that, I was thinking that there are two camp of Buddhist school that talks about Buddha nature.
No. Let's not talk about Buddha nature because
no, I'm not talking about Buddha nature. One
it's
camp say
making
that it
for
already
much more
exists.
complicated.
No, one camp say Buddha already exists, and one camp say it is just a potential. So it's kind of like this.
Oh, okay. But the question is, what does it mean, a potential?
There's all the cloud that is covering it, and you need to remove the cloud, and then you can see it. Then you can see the Buddha.
Well,
So
then the Buddha is there, right? It's just covered
yeah, the
by
Buddha
cloud.
is there, and then the sprout is already
so
there.
the sprout is already in the seed, and it's already there, right?
And then you need some additional conditions to reveal the sprout.
Okay, so
I'm
now
trying to think like a Samkhya.
So what you make the difference between the manifest and the unmanifest sprout?
Yeah, otherwise how do we get around something that is already there to be produced again?
Yes, that's a question, right?
Yeah, if the sprout exists as a potential, then it doesn't exist as a sprout. It exists as a potential for a sprout, and that's something different. And, and you're talking, and then you're not talking about something coming from itself. You're talking about something coming from another. In other words, the sprout is this. A potential sprout is not a sprout, and if the sprout arises from the potential, then it's arising from something other than a sprout.
Okay. So you want to go for the second alternative, which is produced from other, right?
Well, I'm suggesting that the argument, if the Samkhyas believe that things exist in and of themselves, that things arise from themselves.
Yeah, pre-exist in their cause.
What? I'm sorry?
Pre-exist in their cause.
Pre-exist. And they say they pre-exist as potential, then it's incoherent to talk about that as pre-existing because it doesn't exist. It can't exist. It doesn't exist because it's merely a potential. It's not the thing itself. The Samkhya, as described, just isn't coherent.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? In other words, the moment that you say it's potential, a potential sprout is not a sprout.
What is a potential sprout?
Exactly. I have no idea what that means.
But I think it's almost like saying an apple seed has the potential to produce an apple tree.
Okay.
And we say that
and
they
what do
have
we
this-
mean? What do we mean by that?
We mean that, you know, an apple tree will not produce a watermelon, that there has to be some concordance between the substantial cause and what you get out of it, right? Because I will never get a watermelon from an apple seed.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
And so I think what all Sankhya
what's
is
the
saying,
conclusion? But the
That they're
apple,
not the same nature. That
but
they're not
the apple seed has the potential. But what does it mean, the potential?
It has the ability to grow into an apple tree.
Excuse
and
me.
not a watermelon plant.
So does
Hello?
it mean, is
Oh.
it the
Is
same
that
thing like,
somebody else?
yeah, is it
Why,
the same
why
thing?
don't I see you?
Oh, sorry, something wrong with my.
Okay. It's a bit
so is
nicer
it the
if I see you, but okay, keep going.
Is it the
Otherwise-
same thing as saying an atom has a potential to be the universe?
What? Sorry,
So is
you
it the
lost
same
me.
thing as saying an atom has the potential to be the universe?
That I don't understand what it means.
You know, I mean, according to Big Bang, an atom became the
Oh,
universe.
we're talking about Nagarjuna. So
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
let's keep
I'm
it
just
simple
trying to
because
understand.
yeah,
I'm just
let's
trying
keep
to
it simple.
understand
I
here
don't want
what
to
you are
talk.
trying to say.
Yeah, I just talk about seed and sprout, nothing
Okay,
more.
okay,
than that.
let's talk about seed and sprout. So you are saying the
No quantum
seed-
physics, no relativity theory, no Big Bang, just
Okay.
seed and sprout, right?
Let's talk about the seed and sprout then. So
Yes.
you are saying a seed has the potential to be the sprout. So-
I'm not saying that, but the Sankhya may be saying that, right?
Okay, but so according to the Purush and Prakriti example, so a seed has the Purush in it to
No,
be a
No,
sprout.
no. Nope. No, you're going absolutely off.
So how
target
can
here.
a seed be a sprout if it's just a seed? I mean, Buddha talks about causes and conditions.
Just talk about the seed and the sprout, nothing else. No Buddha, nothing.
It's just like a intellectual discussion going round and round without understanding anything.
Well, that's Nagarjuna. We're reading Nagarjuna, right?
Yeah,
I don't
but
know
what's
if-
the point? What's the point if we don't
Well-
understand? Just because it's Nagarjuna doesn't mean anything. If we don't understand-
maybe not. I mean, centuries of Tibetan thinkers have discovered that this is a fairly profound
That
text.
means nothing if we don't understand the thing. It
That's
doesn't
what
mean
we're
anything.
trying to do. Exactly. We're trying to understand the text. And the text says, not from itself, not from other, not from both, nor without cause. Never in any way is there any existing thing that has arisen, right? And the question is, do things arise from things that have the same nature or different nature, or both, or neither?
Could I just mention something?
Yes, please.
Yeah. You know, I'm so attracted to the Samkhya view, but then I also think about, this conceptualization I have of a seed and then a sprout as if they're two very distinct things. But then if I think
Yes.
about the evolution of a seed to a sprout, when exactly do we define it as a sprout? And then when does it become a tree? And it just seems like one sort of continuum in which we're sort of putting categories and labels based on, maybe where that would fit in our definition. But then when I think of it
Yes.
that way, it is really hard to think of a seed in and of itself, and a sprout in and of itself.
That's right.
And therefore, it's hard to think of the potential of a sprout or the sprout itself existing within the seed, because those are concepts that we're creating.
Well, yeah, this is concept that we're creating, but when we talk about causes, this is concept we're creating as well, right? So, question, you seem to think that the tree comes out of the sprout, right?
It's an evolution in time.
Well, if you think scientifically, actually, what's the seed provides? The seed basically provides the DNA, right, of the tree. Now, the DNA is not going to become the tree, right? It's just a blueprint to make the tree, right? So even if you take modern scientific thinking, it's not the case that the sprouts become the tree, right? It's a case that the sprout has a kind of blueprint to make the tree. What does become the tree? Well, nothing, right? Or everything, a lot of things, right? So this is the first alternative, not from itself, right? But you're right, the Samkhya way of thinking is very interesting because it has this idea that everything is evolving from a kind of origin, right? A kind of source. And that's what Nagarjuna wants us to undo, right?
Professor Dreyfus, so do you think what Nagarjuna is really going after is that the original source is an ultimate reality of Prakriti? He's going after the fact that you are positing an eternal entity.
Well, he's going after the idea that you have a source of the whole diversity, right?
Right. So he's going
Yes.
after that ultimate thing. He doesn't really, what we're talking about of seeds becoming sprouts.
No,
that-
he cares a lot about that. He
okay.
cares a lot about that because actually, I think his point is not bad, which is that the sprout does not come out of the seed, right? Now, you may have the kind of slippery slope reasoning, which is good, like, can we really make a clear boundary at which we say, this is a sprout and this is a seed, this is the seed and this is a sprout, right? And that's fine. That's okay. We might have problem with clear boundaries, right? Because
it seems like it's a very deterministic, it's a view that
Which
says
view?
this will happen.
which view? The Samkhya view?
The Samkhya view that,
Okay.
that it will definitely, this will happen. This will make this happen. And so it seems that perhaps an argument against that is that it may or may not happen. It may, if the conditions and the causes are not there, it won't happen.
Okay.
Or if they happen, it may turn out crooked, or it may turn out whatever.
Do you think you're
um,
fair to the Samkhya or not?
Do I?
Do you think you're fair to
I
the
think
Samkhya?
so, because I
I'm
think
not
they've
so
left
sure, but
something out. What?
You-
But-
What's that?
I think they've left out the possibility that it's not predetermined,
Okay.
that it's not going to definitely happen.
Okay. I'm not sure that Samkhya are actually committed to what you think they're committed. Because
Well,
they might...
I don't really know enough about Samkhya.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
learning
I
from you.
understand. You're making a good point, actually. But I'm
Yeah.
always trying to see what is fair and not fair.
Right.
Not in love, but in philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and in philosophy, well, you know, sometime Indian sometimes thinkers are not completely fair to their adversaries, and sometimes they are very fair to their adversaries. And it's important to make the difference between these two different. And so what is interesting—
Why would this not, I'm sorry, why would this not be fair?
Well, because the Samkhya might say, no, I'm not saying everything. I mean, your point is good, because what you're saying is that if the effect pre-exists in the cause, that in a way it's already decided, right? That's what you're saying, am I right?
Yes, and I'm saying that narrows
Okay,
the possibilities of
but—
what can happen.
Yeah, but it might say, okay, the sprout is in the seed, but the seed might be burned, and so the sprout will not arise, or the sprout will, or the condition might not be enough for the sprout to arise, right? Samkhya could say that, no?
What I'm trying to find is where to put growth, where growth can be part of that.
Exactly. Now, one way that the Samkhya sometimes try to get out of it is making a difference between manifest and unmanifest sprout, by saying that there is an unmanifest sprout in the seed, and that what is happening is that the growth, what you call the growth, is a manifestation, right? That's one way they're trying to get out of Dodge. And do you think it's going to work?
No.
No, why not?
Because it's still saying that this is going to happen, and maybe something prevents it from happening, but it's still a predetermined view of what's going to happen. Could that be a rebuttal?
Maybe. I'm not sure that Samkhya think that everything is predetermined, because they think it's contained in the cause, but something might happen to the cause, right? And so it might not come out. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, but there's something very narrow, and I'm trying to put my finger on it.
No, you're right.
It's a very linear.
Yes, you're absolutely right, because they think that, yeah, no, that's a very good point, which is that in a way, you're right, it's a very narrow way to think about production, as being production is not producing something new, it's manifesting what is already there, right?
Yeah.
And that's, you're saying that's not how causality works, right?
I think.
Yeah, because you want causality to create new things, as Richard wanted, right?
Well, it's not necessarily.
So
new things, but where it goes, I guess.
Well, it is
to
new
leave that
things,
open.
right?
What?
It is new things. That's what's so interesting about causality, is that it produces new things, right?
Yes, but it can also produce old things.
You
Can't
mean,
it?
well, things grow old, right? But
no. I mean it can. A causality could produce the model you have of it as some prior model that you have of something. Causality could produce that.
Sure.
That
sure.
I would call old, but
okay.
and new as well.
Well, but it's new, right? And you know,
Okay.
if you think about evolution, that's how evolution works, right? This constant production of new individuals and new species and so on, right? And so I think you're right. It's the Samkhya view is in a way very narrow, right? Okay, not from others. At least we have to do the first stanza, right? But this is good. This is what I like. Debate, question, and answer. This is how my teacher used to teach this
Sorry.
text.
Can I bring us back to the first line?
Yes, we are still at the first line.
So where does the ability to produce new thing comes from?
Well, that's the interesting question, right? And so the second alternative is from other, right?
Yeah.
And who is holding other? It's the
Abhidharma Buddhist.
The early
Yeah.
Buddhists. The early Buddhists.
the Abhidharmika, right? Buddhist, who hold that there is no holes with a W, right? Right? But there is no whole, but all what there is are ultimate simples, which they call dharmas, which can be material or mental, and which interact in extraordinarily complicated ways. And we label this whole that we perceive as object, but really what this object does is this composed of these dharmas which constantly change, right? That's the Abhidharma view, extraordinarily simplified, but boiled down to its philosophical core. If you were to look at the Abhidharma, the different Abhidharma, there would be many different views about that, many nuance, many different ways to pass it out. But let's make it simple and let's boil down to its philosophical core, which is the Abhidharma view is that wholes, like pots, pans, like persons, don't exist, right? Ultimately, in reality, all what exists are moments of materiality and moments of mentality, right? And they're called dharmas. That's what is called, that's in a nutshell, the Abhidharma view, right? You find this view, for example, in Dharmakirti, which Dharmakirti exposed it very clearly. What are the ultimate components of reality? They are moments of materiality and moments of mentality, right? Which come to be and go instantaneously out of existence and then produce the next moment of similar materiality, right? For example, so you can think about particles and particles constantly changing in time, right? Everybody is clear about this view. And so that's not the only view, that's the main view that Nagarjuna is referring to here, is this not from another, right? And so the argument is going to be, if cause and effect are of a different nature, then everything would be born from everything else. Because everything is of a different nature with everything else, right?
I'm not sure how that is a critique of the Abhidharma.
You mean of Abhidharma view of causality, right?
Yes, exactly. I don't understand the relationship between his refutation and what you just described.
Yeah. The relation is the following. Take a pot, because that's the example that is given in Tibetan debate all the time. So let's do it. A pot is a whole, right? W-H-O-L-E. The pot is a whole, right? The whole is not real. It's just a convenient way that we understand reality, because the reality is these particles, right? That exist, that compose the pot. Okay? Now, these particles.
But don't the particles have parts?
No, they don't have parts.
Oh, they don't?
No.
Okay.
Now, you may think this is going to be a problem, and you may be right or wrong, but in the Abhidharma, these parts don't have, these particles are supposed to be partless, right? And we can talk about whether this makes sense or not. But remember, the goal, the way Abhidharma approach reality, objects, is by analyzing them, right? So the most famous example is the Milinda Panya, in which King Milinda asked question to Nagasena and asked question about the person, and then Nagasena answered by giving the example of the chariot, right? And he says, what is a chariot? Are the wheel the chariot, are the axle the chariot, and so on, dividing the whole into parts, okay? Now, when you do this, you have to stop somewhere, right? Because the wheel is also made of parts, right? And so the wheel is also not real. And so you have to keep going, right? And in the Abhidharma, the idea is what is the ultimate reality is this partless moment, this partless particle. Okay? And this partless moment of consciousness. Everybody's on board?
I think I understand that.
Okay.
Do I have to agree to that? Are we?
No, you don't need
Do I
to
have
agree.
Okay, then I don't.
Wait a second. I'm just stating Nagarjuna's opponent's view. You may agree or disagree, right?
Okay.
But let's get it on the table. The view is that the pot is composed of a huge number of particles. These particles are impermanent, right? And so they are also momentary, right? They change constantly. Okay? So what is the relation of the effect to the cause? Think about a particle of the pot, right? The particle of the pot is the effect. What's the cause? The preceding moment of the particle, right? Right? What's the relation between the cause and the effect? They are different, right?
I don't follow that. I don't follow why the
Okay.
cause and effect are different when you're saying that, you know, the cause disintegrates and produces its effect.
Yes, you follow me. We are down to the ultimate particles, right? These ultimate particles are impermanent, right? Meaning they change constantly, right? So if you have moment 1 of particle is the cause of moment 2 of particle, right? What's the relation between moment 1 and moment 2? They are different, right? They are other, right?
Okay.
Right. Right?
Yeah.
It's not like moment 1 becomes moment 2. It's moment 1 disappears and moment 2 arises, right?
Correct.
That's the official Buddhist view, right? Momentariness, right? Now,
Yeah.
if you were to look into different Abhidharma, you would say very complicated discussion, but let's take Dharmakirti view, which is the most coherent expression of this Abhidharma view, is this: we have ultimate simples, particles. These particles constantly disappear and give rise to the next moment, of the particle. It's not the case that the moment 1 becomes moment 2, right? Because otherwise moment 1 would be there, right?
Right.
So moment 1 and moment 2 are different, right?
What is causing that momentary, that moment 1 to disintegrate and the moment 2 to arise?
Well, that's in a way nothing, right?
Then it will be causeless.
According to the Abhidharma view, things disintegrate as soon as they arise, right?
Well, it cannot. Well, even if they say as soon as it arises, there has to be a time gap. Otherwise, there would not be progression of time.
Yeah, that's a good question. So here we are again to the question whether we can have partless moments or not.
Putting that aside, I'm stuck.
No, that's not the sign. That's a crucial question. Whether time is infinitely divisible or whether it's granular. No, this is the same question that we have regarded to particles, right? Are particles, when we divide things, are we going to divide them infinitely, or are we going to hit some kind of rock bottom in which we will say, this is the partless particle? We cannot go further than quarks, right? First we had molecule, then we had atoms, then we had proton, electron, now we're down to quarks, right?
Not only time is a problem, but any kind of connection, if there's a permanent, if anything is permanent, there's no possibility of connecting.
Yeah, we're not talking.
In any way.
Yeah, okay. That's right. Particles moment 1 causes particle moment 2, right?
How could it, if it were permanent?
No, who says it's permanent?
Oh, you didn't say that.
No, I didn't say that. It's partless.
Partless.
Yes, but it's not the
partless.
same as permanent. Partless means it cannot be further subdivided, right?
But then how does it connect? I mean, there's still a connection problem with partless as well, it seems to me. Not permanent, but
the Abhidharma view is that the particle exists and disappears and give rise to its next moment, right? Now you may disagree.
If moment 1 and moment 2 particles are different, on what basis the moment 2 particle arise?
That's Nagarjuna's question, right? Because if they are different, what differentiates particle 1 from everything else in the universe, which is not the cause of particle 2, meaning particle time T1 and particle time T2, right?
But could Abhidharma say that particle T2 is the same as T1? It's, it's just replicated itself in its entirety.
Yeah, that's okay. It doesn't need to change, right? In the sense that it can be similar, but they're different, right?
Isn't that a contradiction to say they're similar and different?
No, like particle 1 looks like, let's say, is an atom of, it's an earth atom, to use the category of Indian Buddhism, right? And let's say earth atoms T1, as soon as it is produced, it disappears, right? Because it's momentary, right? Particle at time T2, what happens? A similar earth atom is produced, right? Earth particle, right? That's how the Abhidharma, with a lot of refinement, thinks about impermanence, right?
Isn't this the same definition of momentariness by the higher school?
It's, you find this in Dharmakirti. Now you write, there are many versions of momentariness. So I am taking the one which is the most simplified, but it doesn't change very much, because as soon as you have momentariness, you're saying that moment 1 is going out of existence before moment 2 is produced. However you want to explain it, that there are many different versions. If you want to you can spend your lifetime, as some of my colleagues do, studying the different Abhidharma texts, and many of them have different versions of that. So you're right, it's in reality much more complicated, but at the end of the day, if you boil it down, it comes pretty much to that.
So is it fair to say that what Nagarjuna is trying to undo here is the notion of momentariness in the Abhidharma? Would that be a summary of what he's trying to do? Would that be fair to say?
He's trying to show that if the version of momentariness, if one takes the version of momentariness, then it's impossible to explain what's the difference between a cause and everything else. That's what he's trying to show.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So, yeah, okay, we have to finish. So not from itself, we did one stanza, which is pretty good. So not from itself, not from other, then not from both, that's easier, because in a way you say it combines the faults of both sides, right? And then not from without cause either, because without cause we don't have effects, right? Never in any way is any existing thing that has arisen. So what is production? Okay, so we can stop here. And then I forgot when we're meeting in 1 week. Okay.
Professor, yes, we meet in 1 week, next Tuesday at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, okay. See you then.
Thanks a
Think
lot.
about this.
Hey, George. Good
Yes?
to see you.
Who is that?
That's Paul Hackett.
Oh my God, no. How you doing, Paul?
Doing well, George. It's always wonderful to hear you talk and hear you teach. You don't know,
Okay.
this is my wife, Jennifer.
Yeah, no, I recognize her now. I thought I had seen her, but you have a very great. How things going?
Going great. We should get caught up sometime, but
Yes, we
I've just
can
been-
do.
I've been lurking in the back listening. It's always wonderful. And I just want to let everyone know how lucky they are to be able to attend a lecture from you.
It's not a lecture, it's a debate.
It's a debate. Yes, that is what your courses were when I took them. They were not.
Yeah,
lectures,
that's
they were
still what
debates.
they are. You can teach, what's that old horse, only one trick, right?
Exactly, something
Yeah,
like that.
that's my trick. Let's talk another time, make a point. Okay, everybody's okay?
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Good night.
You have
Good
left us with
night.
many questions, Professor Dreyfus.
Yeah. Well, we'll meet next week.
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Take care.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.